Mnemonic images are powerful tools learners use to speed up the remembering process. You can use mnemonic images or mnemonic pictures for nearly anything, but the trick is to assign your mnemonic images correctly, and I do believe there is a correct way to do it, or at least an optimal way to do it. And miss just one step, and the process winds up being slow, boring, and unfortunately not worth the time. But learn to use mnemonic images well, and you'll learn at a much faster pace. So if you're ready for the real deal when it comes to using this powerful learning strategy, let's dive in. So mnemonic images are ultimately associations. And let's take a very, very simple example. If you meet a person named Bruce,
Yo, Bruce,
and you want to remember his name, I might think of Bruce Wayne from Batman.
What's up, brother?
And you attach a simple image like a Bruce Wayne from Batman to the new information you want to learn, which is the name Bruce, which is itself attached to the person who just said his name is Bruce. And mnemonic images can be simple and direct like this, with a one-to-one correspondence, like for example, Bruce for Bruce, or it can be as complex as you need it in order to get the job done. Now, for larger learning projects, we typically need more complex imagery. We need more detail in our associations in order to make it work. And then in order to make it scale, we want to place these images inside of tools that we call memory palaces, ideally memory palace networks. But first, let's look at a more complex example so you can see what I mean. So if we have something like mei shu guan, which is a Mandarin term for art gallery, if memory serves, and you got different details in there. You have third tone, fourth tone, third tone, and you have the sounds mei shu guan. And I have Spider-Man wearing a wig to help me remember just the May part. And so Aunt May is Spider-Man's aunt. And so this image of Spider-Man, he has a gray wig on to remind me of this sound. And then there's a shoe in the image for the shoe sound. And there's elements that aren't in the image for reasons I'll talk about in a second, but there is something in my mind in my larger association for a guan sound. And all of this helps me remember an art gallery, which is the meaning of the term. This kind of visual mnemonic, it goes into a memory palace, but because of the complexity of this particular image and just feeling tired that day, I drew it out. I made a little picture for myself, and the index card that it's on becomes part of the process. It becomes part of the memory palace network. Now, the trick to this is, and it's part of the reason why there's some images in this mnemonic image and sometimes there aren't, like there isn't an image for guan, is because we don't want the answer on the card. We don't want art gallery anywhere on the card. The back of my cards when I use them are blank. What we want instead is a puzzle to solve. Now in the memory science, this is related to a term called active recall. I have a video all about how this works on this channel, including another video that has a detailed memory training on using the memory palace technique. I'll have links to these resources in the description below this video. And listen, if you're new here, you might be thinking, Aunt May, Spider-Man? Well, what is this all about? If you would love to play more with associations like this, Aunt May and Spider-Man and myself would love for you to join us by hitting that subscribe button and hitting the thumbs up and enabling notifications so you don't miss the opportunity to discover more about the real deal mnemonics. Because, so many trainings out there, they're focused on memory competitions and so forth, which doesn't get you to the long-term retention of knowledge that becomes wisdom or becomes part of being able to hear and understand and use a language. With that in mind, the truth about these mnemonic images is that mnemonic image, is it really about imagery? You see, the idea of an image mnemonic makes it seem like the associations have to be visual. But I shared with you this example from the card to show you that when I can't imagine something, when I can't see something in my mind, which is a lot of the time, I can make it visual by placing it on a card through a drawing. But visual mnemonics, to really work well, to be what I call magnetic, they can't be just one category of association. They can't be merely visual. In the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, I teach you all the major categories of association and many subcategories of association. And the major are the cave cogs. So cave cogs is itself a kind of mental image that helps you remember kinesthetic, auditory, visual, emotional, conceptual, olfactory, gustatory, and spatial. All of these are kinds of mnemonic images. And you might be thinking, how is space an image? Well, if you think about the size of Aunt May in a memory palace, that's the spatial mnemonic. And thinking of her really, really big, smashing down on a shoe, well, that bigness, the size of her, becomes a kind of image itself. And it doesn't even have to be visual. You could just think about the weight, which is not really spatial, but it's related to the spatial element. The more you play with these cave cogs, and I've just dwelled on the spatial one for a second to show you the rich nuances that you can get into, the more they're going to help you make very, very profound mnemonic images. Now, cave cogs are the major 8 categories that most of us wind up drawing on the most often, but there are 20 more that I teach, and knowledge of these can be very, very useful, especially if you struggle with the visual component, because they get more and more granular without needing to be images in the sense of pictures on a wall. The point is this: true mnemonic images are multi-sensory, and good mnemonic imagery never relies on the visual mode alone. So if you want to learn faster and remember more, visual mnemonics are okay, and they work really well for many people. But if they're not working for you, you really want to explore patching in these other dimensions, as many as possible. Studies have shown that multi-sensory mnemonics can beat flashcards, for example, and I do use flashcards, but I use them in a way that's entangled and collaborates with pure mnemonic imagery in the mind. Multi-sensory mnemonic imagery, the correct kind. Now, overall, multi-sensory association is what you call a kind of guided learning when it's placed out in a memory palace. The memory palace becomes the guide that moves you through a series of associations at scale. This has been shown to be very healthy for adults. Please take care to look for the scientific links on my blog and get as many examples as it takes to finally convince you to start using this if you're still sitting on the fence, because there's so many rewards and riches. And it gives us an opportunity to speak more about this in a special lingo that we can use together. I mean, when it comes to how to use visual mnemonics to remember things, ultimately what you want to keep in mind is that the more that you have many associations working together, the more you're going to be able to learn. So with all this in mind, let's break a process down into steps that you can follow, noting that you're going to need to experiment with exactly how the steps work for you. And the more that you explain to yourself these steps in your own words, and the more you practice the practice of putting them into action, the faster you're going to proceed on your path to mastery over mnemonic images. So step 1 would be, in most cases, to have the target information you want to memorize prepared. Now, I know this step sounds obvious, but it isn't. Many people don't spend any time at all thinking about what they want to memorize, and this causes issues later because mnemonic images are associations, and they can blur into each other if they aren't separated and arranged in optimal ways. So for example, when you're memorizing a speech, you may want to memorize the quotes that you use in the speech first. Sounds a bit weird, but that's actually how I approached my TEDx talk. And then I knew where those quotes were, and I was able to just fit them in as part of the larger speech that I memorized. Maybe when you're memorizing foreign language vocabulary, you might want to organize the words by theme, or as I prefer to do, alphabetically. Or you could memorize them alphabetically within a theme. It's up to you, and you need to explore. But typically, you'll want to have some sort of period of time that you spend arranging the information to optimize the process of memorizing it. And that's where step 2 becomes very useful, and it helps you avoid poor information organization. And this is the memory palace. And you can definitely use mnemonic images without a memory palace. Some people prefer to do it that way. Some people prefer the story and the link method. However, there's something to consider in that, because a story in many ways is like a memory palace, just looked at in a different way. And so it's powerful to be able to link the two together, to use the linking method to link the story method to a memory palace or a mnemonic journey. So think about that as you go through the process of learning these techniques, and you can strengthen both and not necessarily have one or the other, but rather have them working in tandem. Now, in terms of the memory palace technique itself and storing mnemonic imagery, Some people, they like to use real buildings. Some people like to use imaginary buildings, or buildings that are not imaginary but that they've seen online. They've seen them in movies, they've seen them in Google Maps, etc. Now, I personally avoid using those types of memory palaces because they ultimately are what I call memorized palaces. And that means that I had to have an additional step. I had to memorize the location in order to use the location. And this is utterly unnecessary when you use your unique ability of spatial memory to pretty much recall places that you've been without having to memorize them, because you've been there. It's something the brain does. But if you haven't been as fortunate as I have been to live in so many different places, and sometimes it was actually not that lucky to have to live in so many different places, but nonetheless, if you don't have that many options, you still have options. You can use tools and technologies to never run out of memory palaces, and I have a video called How to Find Memory Palaces that goes deep into this topic, linked for you down in the description of this video. The point being, memory palaces are a tool for organization, but also, when you think about it, memory palaces are mnemonic images unto themselves, but they're a very special kind of mnemonic image. They're the mnemonic image into which you can place other mnemonic images, and it doesn't always work the other way around, although it can. Now, the next step is to select your mnemonic images skillfully. And a lot of people, they get started with this and they give up because they don't know to do these things that we're talking about now. They make weak mnemonic images. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you're learning a line of scripture, like, "To answer before listening, that is folly and shame." Now, they might use a mnemonic image of a tutu answering a B-shaped telephone to get started. And that's great, you're on the path. But the problem is that these images are generic and they're vague. To use the magnetic memory method, you choose much more specific references. So I would certainly stick with the tutu. That's a great idea. But I would add Desmond Tutu. Now, Desmond Tutu wearing a tutu is a lot stronger than just a piece of cloth floating around on its own. And then with this image secured in a memory palace, we can now use cave cogs in a much more rich way, a much more evocative way, a much more magnetic way. Because I would literally pretend to be Desmond Tutu and feel that tutu against my skin. And I would hear him dancing around like a ballerina on his way to answer the B-shaped phone. But it would not be just any B-shaped phone. It would be the character from the Bee movie voiced by Jerry Seinfeld. So I'd be hearing this. And these specific references make it easy to pack in the sounds, the emotions, the physical sensations, the elements of size, smells, and tastes. And it's so much more powerful than visual mnemonics on their own, precisely because they can be elaborated. And that's the scientific term, elaborative encoding. And elaborative encoding is so much easier and faster when you base it on real imagery that's already in your memory. I don't know Desmond Tutu very well, but he is already in my head. I have an idea of who he is, so I don't have to do so much work animating him. He's already self-animating by virtue of the magic of memory. This is what makes it magnetic. Now, step 4 is to review your mnemonic images strategically. And again, this is where the memory palace comes in. When you have it in play, you're able to gather together dozens, if not hundreds, of mnemonic images. My TEDx talk involved over 300 magnetic images, to give you a simple example. Though, please keep in mind, it's not a numbers game, and there are different ways to count how many images are involved, depending on your exact approach. But it's not really that interesting how many images are involved. Really, you just want to have as many images as it takes to get the job done, as quickly as it takes to get the job done, so that you can just get on to the joy of using the imagery. And in my experience, the best way to review the associations in order to get them into long-term memory is to use dedicated patterns. These are the recall rehearsal patterns that I teach in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. Why they're so important scientifically is because they give equal doses of primacy and recency to each mnemonic image in the memory palace, and that ushers them into long-term memory as quickly as possible. Now, the 5th step is to experiment. And so I've been talking about a way to integrate flashcards, which came from experiments that I did. Now you can use digital flashcards using an app like Anki. Well, the same rules apply. So whether you use paper cards, digital cards, or just the pure memory palace technique, and I love to use that myself whenever I can, just go ahead and make sure that you add those multisensory dimensions and practice memorizing many different types of information. This is another thing that people miss. They're just stuck on, I have to memorize X and I'm only going to memorize X, whether it's physics or it's some other form of math that you're into or language learning. I'm only going to focus on these things. Well, that's great, and you do want to spend a sufficient amount of time on those topics to be sure, but you also want a wide range of imagery. You want a holistic approach, some numbers, some words, some mathematical formulas at some point in your journey, ideally as quickly as possible, so that you can develop that wide range of ability. Because if you really want to get into memorizing books, well, then you've got always different kinds of imagery, different kinds of information coming in, and you need to be able to snap them together. And knowing how, when, and why to shift your mnemonic strategy is the key to long-term success across the learning landscape. Now, you also want to develop your skills further, and that's the next step. As you continue learning to use mnemonic images, develop other systems of mnemonic images. Now, there are a number of systems you can work on developing. One is the major system. Another is a peg word system, or what I think of more as an alphabetical system of association. And then you can develop all of these into what's called a 00 to 99 PAO. And then, of course, there's the memory palace system, noting that every memory palace is itself a kind of mnemonic image. Within about 2 to 5 hours of developmental work, the piles of mnemonic images these systems give you will be ready for you to use in a flash. And then the rest of it is just practice. For how long? Well, forever, for as long as you want to learn. If you want to learn unfamiliar names like Gangador Dianad, you won't have to create a mnemonic image from scratch. You'll just consult your peg word list or your alphabet list for ideas. If you have to memorize a number like 3392445, all you'll need to do is use your 00 to 99 PAO, which has images perfectly suited for those numbers. It's ready to go, and all you have to do is build it. If you build it, your memory will come. As we move beyond this idea of using mnemonic images, mnemonic pictures, whatever you want to call them, to the practice of using magnetic imagery, thanks as ever to our channel members for supporting this channel, and to everyone who has my books, has my courses, or joins us in the magnetic Zoom room as part of my inner circle. Team Magnetic appreciates that more than words can express. And to all of you who have been asking about my forthcoming detective novel about David Williams and how memory techniques help him deal with PTSD and early cognitive decline, thanks for your patience. There are still a few steps to go so that it's something truly great. And Team Magnetic is working on it behind the scenes like busy little bees, but very specific busy little bees, not generic or vague ones. So for that novel, please stand by, and the game that goes along with it is also yet to come. In the meantime, rest assured that mnemonic images are fun and easy to develop and use. The trick is to not treat them like pictures or limit them to the visual mode. The more you broaden them into the multi-sensory capacities of your mind, the greater the memory power you will have. And you can apply the Cave Cogs formula to your memory palaces too, which is another wonderful way to make them vibrant and truly magnetic. It's the best kind of mnemonic image at the end of the day, the memory palace, because it is indeed the one that lets you store all of the rest. And if you need help building your first memory palace and want an entire network of them, go to my site and register for the free course, magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. This course will help you develop memory palaces and all your magnetic imagery in optimal ways to house all the information that you want to be able to access in a flash. And that way, not only will you remember a lot more a lot faster, but the more you know, the more you can know, which is truly the most amazing adventure in life, is to have at your fingertips the things that you've learned ready to be learned again in real time, because you can access it from memory and pass that knowledge on, or use it to get a raise, or whatever it is that you feel called to do as the architect of your future. So again, many thanks, and until we have a chance to speak again, make use of truly magnetic imagery and keep yourself magnetic.
And listen up, brother, this is Batman, and if you need to find memory palaces but you're struggling, watch the video on how to find memory palaces next.